Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new G-Rated. It's been a while since we've done one of these, but I am here with Derek, Johnny. I'm your host, Gerald, and today we get to talk about Season 3 of The Mandalorian just in time for Star Wars Day.
That's right.
We're a little late on the season finale, but this is like the flagship Star Wars show, so I wanted to go back and talk about it a little bit. But before we get started, I want to call attention to the fact that Derek is wearing a fantastic Star Wars shirt.
I'm gonna stand up because it's got a matching shorts on too. I got the whole outfit,
and he's got the purple Sabine hair, so I love it. He's prepared.
That's
Johnny is also prepared. I've got my Ahsoka shirt on, so
Yes.
we nerds came prepared today. Love it.
Yeah.
Derek, I'll start with you. Just your overall base impressions of the new season of Mando.
I think I'm with a lot of people where I was a bit disappointed by it. I think part of it is maybe it's Mando fatigue a bit. Maybe it's just that they kind of set a high bar with other seasons. But I will say that when we got to the end, as things started coming together, it felt like the season that was kind of splintered and not very centered came together very well. And I mean, so much of it was about Bo-Katan and reclaiming Mandalore and, basically the results of that and kind of mixing in, with what's happened in previous seasons. But like the focus at times seemed a bit kind of all over the place. And then the final two episodes I felt like did a good job of bringing everything together.
Johnny, how about you?
Yeah, I'm with Derek. I think it's one of the more disappointing series that we've had in some time. And I put the first two seasons, especially the second season, amongst some of the best Star Wars ever since The Empire Strikes Back. And so when you watch this season, it felt drastically different in terms of tone. It was very much like structured, almost like an animated series where it was like Adventure of the Week. And there were very few episodes that drove the plot forward. Whereas in season 1 and season 2, everything felt like much more methodical and we were building towards something. And this season was frankly all over the place. You look back at season 2 specifically, the rewatchability of some of those episodes, and even the two standalone episodes in the Book of Boba Fett are fantastic. How many of these episodes in season 3, with all due respect, have a ton of rewatchability value? At least for me, not a ton. And as Derek mentioned, it almost seemed like they could have done a Bo-Katan show separately on a lot of this, and it would have done very well. I know, like listening to and reading up on some stuff, like a lot of that Rangers of the New Republic show that was canceled, they've kind of forced into this season.
Yeah.
So I'm with people that are like, well, Mando was kind of lost in his own show, and I wonder if some of the execs at Lucasfilm are like, well, we kind of just have to piecemeal it together, and then you lose what makes the show so special.
I feel like the biggest thing for me was, like you said, that Mando and Grogu were kind of upstaged in their own show. It became the Bo-Katan show, and the justification was kind of like, well, it says the Mandalorian, not this one specific Mandalorian. Okay, but the first two seasons are about this one specific Mandalorian, and you kind of veer completely away from them. And look, I love Bo-Katan as a character. I think the actress did a great job. It's difficult to cross over from doing voiceovers in an animated show to actually being the character in a live adaptation. And I thought she was fantastic in it. But it felt like they took so many cool concepts that could have played out through the course of the whole season. And instead we got some really standoff episodes that were just bad. Like they weren't like, I know in episode 3, that was the first one where it was kind of like, okay, we're trying a little too hard to be Andor here, getting into the nitty gritty of the Republic or the New Republic and the Empire. And then there was that one with Lizzo and Jack Black that was just like,
it was just flat out bad.
Just a terrible episode.
And the thing about it is, like, a lot of people were mad that they were in that, or especially Lizzo was in it, right? But it was like, it was just bad characters. Like, I felt like they would have been annoying characters no matter who played them, and it would have just been a weird kind of shoehorned in kind of deal. But Johnny addressed it, and you did too. I felt like this season was bogged down by production issues. And when I say production issues, I mean what you said about like shoehorning in, again, the storyline for other things they were going to do. The way that Mando and Grogu were, just kind of supplementary characters in their own show. It felt very much like the Book of Boba Fett, where they showed up and they were there, and then it was like, oh, hey, they're part of this, and then all of a sudden that show focused very much on them and not Boba Fett as much, and then people complained about that they turned Book of Boba Fett essentially into a season of Mandalorian.
And that's my issue too, is like Book of Boba Fett, the first like 4 episodes before they bring them into it were not great. Like they weren't very interesting. But by doing that, they kind of hijacked what should have been the start of season 3, because if you'd have put those last 2 or 3 episodes of Book of Boba Fett to start this season off, I would feel so much differently about it, because those were great episodes.
And that's, I think, what's happening is things are getting moved around. They're getting moved around for reasons that aren't the right reasons, right? Because what we got out of the first 2 seasons of this show was a well-told story that wasn't really being interfered with outside of the creative minds that were involved. Now what you have this season, for instance, because people were like, hey, where was Boba Fett in this season of the show? Apparently, according to reports, he just didn't get the call because apparently they were out of money.
That's wild.
Their budget was limited. That would explain no Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka in this particular season either.
Which pissed me off.
Right. I mean, okay, so and we brought up like the cartoon, the animated elements of it, right? This show has so much kind of transferring over from Rebels and from the Clone Wars cartoon show. But I felt like this season was almost like a lot of that. Like I felt like they were trying to do a lot of the same things that they've done in the past with Clone Wars, where they just kind of pivoted and now made a story arc in this season about this one character that isn't the main characters that we've been watching up to this point.
Well, I mean, seasons 1 and 2 had a lot of serialized episodes where it would have an adventure of the week, but at least they were interesting. Like the Lizzo Jack Black episode was just so much whimsy and nothing interesting. But yeah,
they had payoffs to it too.
Right.
Like you would mix in bits and pieces. Like in season 1, that episode on Tatooine, and they had the post-credit scene teased Boba Fett the next season. Right. Like there was very little substance to this season. And then on top of it, like the episodes were way too short. Like Andor rolls out 50 to 60 minute episodes. For the season finale of this season and season 3 to be 32 minutes long is unacceptable. And that has to point to we're out of money. We're laying off people. We have to then just don't release the season or make the last 2 episodes one episode. But you watch the season finale in season 2, a full hour, tons of content, a post-credit scene, and then you watch this season and it doesn't even feel like the same caliber of production. I mean, I know they do everything on the volume, and sometimes it works, and then Gerald, like we talked about, like on Obi-Wan, sometimes it looks kind of cheap and TV-ish. I thought this season in particular looked so kind of lackluster compared to prior seasons in terms of like everything that the Mandalorians did with like the big monsters on their home world, and let's just stay in one little area. And then they spend so much time in like the city with Grief Karga. It's like, how many times can we reuse these sets? Whereas like in season 2, he went to like 5 or 6 different planets and so many different sets. So when you know that that's playing a factor and then you rewatch it again, it's like, well, of course, they didn't have as much time or money. They couldn't spend money on Boba Fett or Ahsoka. So how do we tie it in and make it make sense? This season felt very inconsequential. Like if you just had fast forward this outside of bringing the 2 tribes together, which did not feel earned at all. It felt very like snap of a finger. Oh, it's all taken care of.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's laughable that Mando is the first person to go and test out like the oxygen level on Mandalorian. Everybody's right there, could have done it in like, it's disappointing because I hold Jon Favreau in such high regard, like saving Star Wars. I'm not a fan of the sequel trilogy. And then like, Boba Fett, I think Boba Fett's better than this show in terms of just like, it's almost kind of like a guilty pleasure. Return of the Jedi has some of that redeeming quality too. So I thought the characters were more interesting, like Chrysanthemum and the Hutt twins and Cad Bane.
The whole gangster aspect of it was cool, you know.
The Vespa people, that was terrible. But that notwithstanding, you got Cobb Vanth. Just as a whole, it was better. Like, it was at least more entertaining, especially the finale with the Rancor. Like this season, there was not a lot of redeeming qualities, which is unfortunate. And I put that, you got to put it on Jon Favreau because he's writing all this.
Right. It felt like the writing suffered. Like there were some lines of dialogue that were just not very good. There were probably 2 episodes that I really liked. It's the one where he first gets to Mandalore. And then the penultimate one, The Spies. That was obviously the best episode of the season. But to your point, it just felt like, you know, it's funny because we've knocked Star Wars in the past for having too many cameos and being a little too, you know, fan moment heavy. But like this had nothing. It didn't have like enough characters. Like we got Zeb for like 2 seconds from Rebels. We got a mention of Grand Admiral Thrawn, which I get it. You're saving him for Ahsoka. But I thought there would be some tie-in at the end to kind of set up the new, you know, the next thing. And it feels like they're kind of going down the Marvel path, where when Marvel started, each movie was a standalone thing dedicated to that character or that story. Sure. And as they tried to start interweaving these things for the crossover event, the quality of the individual movie dipped a little bit because they're trying to bring in all these different things.
Let's talk about the goddamn space whales, because I'm still
the Purgle.
I'm furious about the space whales.
Okay.
The Purgle, right? Okay. So if you've watched the cartoons, you know that this is something they've addressed. Mm-hmm. But in the show, when they were going through light speed, right? Mm-hmm. Like they Grogu had the ability to kind of see outside of light speed these shadows of these big creatures kind of floating, and like they end up being very significant in I believe Rebels is what they end up being, and specifically to Ahsoka's story. But it was like they put that in the episode simply as something for people that have seen everything that Star Wars has ever put out there, because I feel like Rebels is like, even if you've seen Clone Wars, still a lot of people have seen Rebels, right? So it's like, especially adults, right? Kids, people that are younger, people that are in their 20s or like teenagers, I get it. You still watch animated stuff, unless it's like, you know, American Dad or Family Guy. We're not watching that stuff, right? But I mean, it's a very good show, and I understand why they want to bring over so many elements from both of those animated shows into like real life, into, you know, live action television shows, live action movies. It's all very exciting, and it's stuff, again, it's kind of exciting for people that know what it is. And then if they give it a proper explanation, it's exciting for new viewers that have no idea what it is. This had no payoff. Grogu just saw them, and then I waited the rest of the goddamn season to see what they were going to do with the Purgle, and they don't. And like that right there is just a small piece of what was wrong with this season, because again, it's like it relies too much on you either knowing what they are or then going and looking them up on the internet. And then they didn't do anything with it. And I still don't even understand. Like, maybe it's going to be a long-term payoff, right? Maybe when we get to Ahsoka, that's what a lot of people have hypothesized that we're, you know, going towards. But even that kind of sucks. Like, you're really using this show to hype up other shows that aren't out yet. And that's going to be like some long-term callback that you had to watch this show and this season in order to know what's going on then. I mean, there's just a lot there that I don't like with that kind of stuff.
I don't mean to knock on the sequel trilogy, but it was very sequel trilogy-esque, where like the Darksaber, for instance, like Din's trying to learn it in the Book of Boba Fett, and then he just gives it away this season, and then it gets destroyed. That's similar to like Maz Kanata giving Rey the lightsaber for Anakin Skywalker. No, you know, discussion on where that came from, how they got it. No payoff for that. And I also, like, Gerald, you mentioned the episode, it was called The Spies. So everybody theorized, well, there's another spy outside of who's working for Moff Gideon. And then they never paid that off. It's like, okay, is the Armorer the spy? Is Axe Wolves the spy? Right. And so people were getting excited. I would have loved a heel turn from the Armorer. I would have loved her to set up Bo-Katan. I would have loved it. There was no internal conflict with that.
No, right.
And it's like they set these kind of parameters, and then they never followed through. And I'm like, Mandalorian, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, like, you're better than this. Did you guys just take the spring off and not fix any of this stuff?
Right. It's to your point. I still don't know who the fucking spies were in that episode. I couldn't tell you who they were.
That's what I'm saying. And it's like everything that you could imagine was better than what they did, because you start doing that fan thing, which they didn't give you a lot of that either. Right. They didn't give you a lot of this season of like wondering what we were going to see in the next episode. It's like a lot of the episodes ended up very nice and neatly, and then there wasn't any, like, you just waited until the next episode.
Right.
You know?
And all the loose threads, to your point, like the Purgles thing, the Darksaber thing, the way that so smoothly they just join the two factions together. I'm sorry. The armor was a total dick the first 2 seasons about not being able to take your helmet off. And then she's suddenly just like,
you know what?
You're good. This person can unite our clans, so let's just let her do whatever the hell she wants.
Now, I saw an interview with Katee Sackhoff, who plays Bo-Katan, and that scene where she's trying to rally them together, like they shot a ton more footage. Her speech was way longer, and they just cut it. And you think about that Lizzo episode where it was hijacked by Jack Black, and then the whole episode didn't make any sense. It had no consequences. And then the last 5 minutes is just tacked on. She's rolling around with axe wolves, and then he just hands her the Darksaber. Well, he could have given her the Darksaber before then and admitted that beforehand. Or like they should have spent that entire episode doing character development with Casca Reeves and all of those Mandalorian. They used 5 minutes in the end of the episode. That's not That's not budget. That's just bad writing. Like you should grab everything beforehand, and that entire episode should have been dedicated on trying to win them over.
It was terrible because it was something that we theorized about in episode 2 when she like saves him from the robot and she hands it back to him, and there's a very obvious purposeful camera shot of her handing it back. And that could have been an opportunity to do like a Game of Thrones type thing where you have these political 100%. Factions and there's more intrigue to it. And maybe Mando actually does want it after all. And there's some conflict there. And instead it was just like, oh, remember that thing that happened like 4 episodes ago that we just have not mentioned until now? Yeah. Now we're going to drop it on you in the last 2 seconds of the show.
She earned it. She earned it. What the fuck?
They ruined the whole intrigue of like Mandalorian culture of the Darksaber. Just like what was the point of the whole Darksaber if it just gets destroyed and now we're like, okay, well, we don't need it after all. Like what the hell? They've ruined it.
This is why you have to be so careful with the payoffs on this stuff, because again, they've created this mythology over, multiple seasons for some of these things, and then like you said, they just throw it out the window, right? Din Djarin had to be pissed watching them let her just walk around without her. Like, after all the bullshit I got, after all the times I was told I wasn't a Mandalore because I took it off for a hot afternoon. There's just a lot that didn't make sense. Obviously, things have gotten all over the place. We talked about all the reasons why it feels like it's kind of been not the best storytelling. But another part of it now feels like they don't have to do as much with these shows on streaming services, because it's like you and I talked about with Last of Us, that felt very short. They just want you to subscribe to watch it, right? So if they do 8 episodes at 36 minutes a piece, like, hey, that's enough, right? We've done 8 episodes each season, and that's basically what we're putting out there. But that's why this season kind of felt lazy. It felt like they were just going through the motions a bit more, yet they still handled stuff that was very, very big, Moff Gideon having, his own Mandalorian suit made out of Beskar, and that just lasted
could have been so cool.
Hot minute, There's just like so much stuff like that in this season that they were like, this is cool, but then it just kind of was over real quickly.
Well, I'm a huge nerd, and I read like the Reddit boards, and I try not to get into spoilers, but like, I don't know if you guys had kind of been following this, but like there was legitimate momentum for Din to be killed off in the finale because of Pedro Pascal, like supposedly upset, and he wasn't on set at all this year. He didn't take his helmet off. He could have easily taken his helmet off. They could have worked that into the storyline. Katie's got her helmet off. He's at his little house at the end. Didn't do any of that. And so you heard all the talk about like, well, the Mandalorian isn't just about Din, it's about everybody else. And they were steering the story away. Like I legitimately thought there was a chance that they would have killed Din off. They would have pushed, Katee and Grogu and everybody else. And I think that's something to watch for. I know they want to build it up into this movie, and I don't think you can do the movie without Din. Right. But you think about like the studio, if you read like between the tea leaves, forced the Din and Grogu to reunite like almost instantly. They were going to try to delay that, which they should have.
They absolutely should have. Yes.
And then everybody's like, no, we have to sell toys. Let's put them back together in the Book of Boba Fett, which was great episodes, not a good idea. And then I think, I don't know what Pedro Pascal's beef is, but like, let him take his helmet off. Let him be Pedro Pascal in this show. Right. I think that would have played way better. And instead it was a very hollow performance this series, this season, because he was not a focal point, and it was obvious.
Yeah, and especially if you let Bo-Katan take the helmet off, I thought that was clearing the pathway to allow a little leniency with this rule, and instead we have still 3 seasons in seen Pedro Pascal's face twice.
Yeah,
right.
Like Jesus
Christ, it's not him. It's never him. He just has to do some voice acting for one afternoon for an entire season, and that's all that they get out of him.
Yeah,
and I mean honestly, it doesn't surprise me. We are to the point now where people are going to these like comic book conventions to meet the body doubles that play Din Djarin in the costume, right?
Yeah.
Which is just wild to me that we're just putting that level of celebrity on any kind of pedestal.
Give me the armor and I can be a double.
Right. Oh, by the way, she went to Comic-Con in full costume, walking around talking to people, and nobody knew it was actually her because cosplayers are so good. You're not even going to know the real actor when they're standing next to you in costume. But I think the biggest thing that I think we have talked about is outside influences impacting the show. And that's almost the problem when you get it to be as popular as this show is. Think about the fact that in season 1, they wanted to start producing Grogu toys prior to the season releasing, which is how they normally would do it with any movie or show. And Jon Favreau said, absolutely not, because I don't want anything ruining that fucking first episode. That was such a moment that if you didn't get to experience without knowing Grogu existed, you just can't go back in time and experience again, because that was such a moment. Like, I got tears in my eyes watching that little guy come out of his little, mechanism, right? So it's like they used to take the storytelling and the show itself so seriously that they put it before all of those other deciding factors like merchandise and how much money they were making and all of that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And now, unfortunately, it's just the biggest, best Star Wars thing out there as far as popularity. Still think, obviously what we've seen from other things, that's like some of the best storytelling we've seen. But you have to say that Mandalorian is by far, because it's good with kids. Kids love Grogu. Kids love, the Mandalorian. They love the helmet. They love all of that stuff. But a big factor is that it's been just such a good show to go along with all of that, very, very smart, integrating of things that people all walks of life will enjoy. And there's still a lot to like for this show. Like, I still enjoyed this season at times. There's just not enough of, I guess, like that cliffhanger, factor, that thing that made me want to watch next episode to see what happens next. It's like all of the conflict got resolved within the episode, it felt like, with the exception of like 1 or 2 episodes of the season. And even the ending was the most super happy ending of a season that you could ever have. Like, I looked at my wife and said, is it over? Is that the last episode where we're going to see? Because it was just such a...
It literally had the like camera close out, like the little wink to it was very
the man is on a farm with his feet up watching his boy chase fucking frogs. Like, that was a wrap. It was the happy ending.
They need to take a break. I'm hopeful they can rebound. Although, like, this is... Again, I like the Book of Boba Fett for what it is, but it was not well received, right? And so for Favreau, this is back-to-back mid-seasons, like, and I say mid, like people are calling it the mid-DeLorean because it's just, it was average, right?
Right.
And so this is back-to-back, so it's just not a one-off, it's a trend now. I do think Ahsoka is going to be on par with the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian because it was 100% crafted by Dave Filoni. I think he wrote every episode. The attention to detail, is going to be there. The directors are all the same directors they've used for The Mandalorian.
Right. It's probably where all the resources are going,
Right. It looks much more cinematic. Like it's gonna be high level. It is. And then like Skeleton Crew is created by Favreau and Filoni, but it's new characters. So I think people's expectations will probably be tempered a little bit. Like until they really have a clearly defined avenue in which they want to take Din and Grogu and the rest of this, they should hold off. They should wait until they have something concrete, a begin, middle, and end for a complete season. Because this one, and goodness, you think about like season 2 of The Mandalorian aired at like the height of the pandemic, right? It was like in 2020. So they had all this time to write a season 3, and they really just kind of butchered it, and that's unfortunate. So give Favreau some time, let him write something even better. I do worry though, like, I saw Pedro Pascal's in like the Gladiator sequel.
Yeah.
He's like, what is
he? He's the biggest actor in the world right now.
5 to 7 actor right now in the world. Like, how much does he want to continue doing this? You better make it worth his while.
Especially if he can't show his damn face.
Yeah,
but
right.
I mean,
let him take his
maybe that
off.
makes it easy for him.
Or let him ride a fucking mythosaur. Like, if you're going to introduce a mythosaur and then just leave it beneath the depths the whole time. Or let him, like, that was the other thing that bothered me, is Grogu was just table setting for this whole season. There would be like a reaction shot of his face just to remind you that he's there. His character arc, there was nothing at all. Like in season 2, it lays the groundwork for, okay, he's going to be on this Jedi journey maybe, or is his attachment to Din going to lead him to the dark side? And there was, the only thing that we got from him was like training with that Mandalorian kid where he jumps over him and shoots, and that's it.
And that's the whole thing, is the idea, the concept of him even being a Jedi now has been completely abandoned for him being a Mandalore.
So should have left him with Luke for multiple seasons.
Yeah. But the first
come back in like 2 years.
Right. The first episode, they were making a mask, and I was so hyped for it to be a tiny Grogu mask.
Nope.
And it wasn't. It's just for some punk ass kid I've never seen before. I should have known right away this season wasn't going to go my way. But that's the other thing. I mean, I felt like at times the one thing this show did was give us what we wanted. Right? Like if you like mentally were like, oh man, I'd love to see that IG-11 take out all these bounty hunters right now. They're like, hold on, son. Say less. We got you, fam.
Right.
And in this one, obviously Grogu powering the IG-12 was kind of awesome. And he just gets punked. He just gets knocked over and has to jump out of it and run for his tiny life. Like I wanted one scene of him just going full guns blazing on like a room of people and him just in the middle operating it. They never gave us even that.
There was not a lot of that fan satisfaction. But let's give our final scores out of 10, because I think we're all pretty in solid agreement that there were some moments here, but not enough. Derek, what would you go out of 10 on this season?
I would go 6, because I still think Mandalorian as a show is still quite good by comparison to other television, but compared to itself, it's not nearly as good. It's almost what happens to all things Star Wars. It's like eventually it gets stretched out long enough where it feels like the early stuff was much better than what they're doing as of late.
Johnny, how about you?
I'm a little tougher. I'll go like 4.5 or 5 out of 10. I'll do 5 out of 10.
Okay.
Again, I talk about like what's the rewatchability this season? Very low. Like how many times am I going to go back? Like I'll go back and watch the Vader stuff from the Obi-Wan series. Although that series was, but that stuff was well done. Stuff in Boba Fett was well done. And then obviously the first 2 seasons of Mando, I think are borderline masterpieces. So I think it's an average filler season that was hyped for a long time. And I had all these expectations and, very little, if any, were carried through. I would have made so many changes to the show. And I know everybody can say that, but minimal conflict, holding out Gideon until the final 2 episodes, failing to push the plot forward. It was an inconsequential season. I mean, it wasn't a waste of time to consume, but it was one step above that. So I'll go 5 out of 10.
It felt very much like a laying the threads, tying loose ends, building to the big crossover movie that they want to do with all these series. And the show itself suffered for it. And like you said, if you have freaking Giancarlo Esposito as your main villain and you save him until the last 2 episodes, like, what are we doing here? Especially with the lame way that they handled it, like the metal on the ship is Beskar, dun dun dun. Like, which man? Like, come on, give me a fucking break. But yeah, I'm gonna go with a 6 out of 10 on this. I still enjoy the show, but coming off of Andor, like our expectations were set high off of Andor, and even without Andor, just off of season 2 itself, because you think about the way that we felt after those last couple episodes where we get Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and then Luke Skywalker in the freaking finale. And then this is just like, here's a 30-minute episode that ends with the camera zooming in on Mando and his son playing with frogs. Like, what the? It's very disappointing. And a 6 for me is pretty critical, because I feel like most things Star Wars, I'll give it a 7 out of 10 just because it's Star Wars at least. Oh, yeah. So they've got some things to prove moving forward with this. But that's going to do it for us here at G-Rated. You can follow me at Gerald Bourget on Twitter. You can follow Derek at Cap_Caveman. And you can follow Johnny at Johnny Venerable. Until next time, keep it G-Rated.